seems shocked, but there's just one problem. The way the table's been set for dinner, it's missing two places. So obviously, they weren't expecting Bond and Brand to return. Eventually, Bond unearths Drax's plot and discovers the Moonraker rocket is actually a nuke that he plans to drop on London. Eventually, Bond's caught and held hostage along with Brand. The pair manage to reprogram the rocket and send it to the submarine that Drax is escaping in. During this wait, the pair snuggle in the shower with Bond holding her as she weeps into his arms. The pair share an intimate moment and it clearly inspired the shower scene in Casino Royale. Upon returning to MI6, Bond's expecting to take a holiday with Brand, but he comes to a shocking realization. Upon speaking with Brand, turns out she's actually engaged and she goes off to meet with her soon-to-be husband. Bond ends up going off on holiday alone, and in the end, it's a pretty sad way to close out the story. That also feels very fitting. Bond is once more left alone, and it further pushes him down the path of a lone wolf.
Not what I want to get stuck with tonight.
Now, in scripting the film, Tom Mankiewicz was brought back on board to provide an early outline. This included an extensive scene at Drax's lair, which eventually got condensed down. There was also an attack on a base using an Astrostar microjet, Bond and Holly being dragged through water, and a chase through Paris which led up to the Eiffel Tower.
Why didn't he buy the Eiffel Tower as well?
He did. What the actual fuck did you just say to me right now?
While these moments were cut from the film, they'd appear down the line in Octopussy, For Your Eyes Only, and Meeting You with a View to a Kill. Moonraker was also originally a super bomb orbiting the Earth. Steven Spielberg also made another attempt to direct the film, but Cubby turned him down. Pre-Jaws, he'd been too inexperienced for The Spy Who Loved Me, and post-Jaws, Cubby said they couldn't afford him. The pair did have a fun back and forth though that we'll talk about later in the breakdown. Taking a safe bet, they returned to Lewis Gilbert, who so far had done two of the franchise's best films. You Only Live Twice and Spy Who Loved Me had both been big hits, and it just made sense to bring him back again, to make like the exact same film for the third time. This film also became a major payday for Moore, who was able to renegotiate his salary. Initially he'd signed a 3-film contract, but that expired with the last one. So he upped his salary from $1 million to $4 and worked on a film-by-film basis until the end of his run. We'll talk on the next few about how they thought about recasting him, and there was constantly to and fro over whether he'd return. Now when it came to the bad guy, they initially cast James Mason. He'd played the villain in North by Northwest, and Eon had obviously been inspired a lot by that film. So it just made sense. Lewis Jordan was also considered as well, and he later played Kamal Khan in Octopussy. However, during those early stages, production pivoted to save on costs, and it became an Anglo and French production under the International Film Treaty. In order to qualify for this though, they had to have some French actors in the bigger parts. Thus, Michael Lonsdale was cast instead, with Corinne Clary being cast as Corinne Defoe. Lois Chiles also got wooed into the movie as well, and she became the Bond girl Holly Goodhead. Sorry, you're what? Nah, but if you watched our last breakdown, then you'll know they originally offered her Anya. Charles was retired at the time though, and it was a chance encounter that made her change her mind for this. Charles actually boarded a plane and ended up seated next to director Lewis Gilbert. Over the flight, they talked about the part and she was convinced to take on the character. Michael G. Wilson was also getting more involved as well, and he featured in 2 cameo parts in the film. The first is as a man on a bridge in Venice, and then as a technician in the Navy control room. Wilson was also studying Aikido, and he recommended his instructor to Shiro Sugar. He ends up playing Drax's henchman Chang, who is a big foe early on in the film. But yeah, obviously the henchman that everyone remembers and who we're here to talk about is, of course, Jaws. He becomes the first henchman to return, and to be fair, you can totally understand why. He lit up the screen last time, and it's just one of those unforgettable villains. Initially cast to be a baddie and the big bad Bond would face at the end, they changed their mind while crafting the script. So many kids had apparently written to Gilbert asking why he had to be a baddie, and thus they shaped him to go on a redemption arc. So if you're wondering why this movie is the way it is, it's all because of trying to please kids, which you can see throughout the film. Youths. But yeah, he's changed through the love of his life, Dolly, who's played by French actress Blanche Ravaillac, or Ravaillac, or however it's pronounced. Now, Dolly herself is a very controversial figure, and we will be answering, does Dolly have braces? Stick around to find out in our segment, Dental Plan. Does Dolly have braces? Lois Maxwell's daughter Melinda also appears in the movie too, and she's one of the perfect specimens that Drax wants for his new world. Ooh, Charles. Ken Adam returned as well, and he built the largest set he'd ever constructed, which took over 222,000 hours to build. In total, the film cost $34 million, which was more than double The Spy Who Loved Me's 13. All in all, it was their biggest production ever, but it all began with one man walking onto a screen. We begin with the transportation of the Moonraker shuttle, which is placed on the back of a 747. Turns out that Drax loaned out one of his Moonrakers to Britain, but due to a technical issue on his own, he's now having to steal it back. Here we have Flight Lieutenant Richards, who's played by Kim Fortune. If the geezer looks familiar, well, it's because he fucking died during The Spy Who Loved Me. However, he's back from the dead once more, as Drax's men hijack the shuttle and take off from the plane. This kills all the pilots, and rest in peace, Bozo. I guess you do only live twice, sucker! It's from here that we then cut to London, which is when M's told the Moonraker's been stolen. It's basically the exact same M scene from The Spy Who Loved Me, and we even end with Moneypenny dropping a sex pun.
Is 007 back from that African job?
He's on his last leg, sir.
Now, on a sadder note, this is the final film featuring Bernard Lee as M. Having been around since the start, this feels like a massive loss in the franchise. At this point, he'd filmed 11 movies and was someone whose face brought a warmth of familiarity. Lee had made a name for himself in several spy classics, including the phenomenal film The Third Man. However, he really carved out his status as a legend through all of his work as 007's boss. Beyond that though, he was a mentor and confidant, and the closest thing Bond had to a father figure. Sadly, he died shortly before filming his scenes for Your Eyes Only. That was the first Bond film to not feature the character, and the script was rewritten to say he was on leave.
M's on leave, and the minister's arrived here with the chief of staff and wants to see you immediately.
But it's a major loss, and I think all the fans can agree that Lee was a special part of the franchise.
We're good to go. Collect the product and bring it back for storage.
And that takes us to one of the best openings we've ever had. Taking weeks of planning and prep, we see as Bond skydives minus the parachute. No, it does feel like they're trying to recapture the end of the pre-title sequence from The Spy Who Loved Me, but when the stunt's this good, I really don't mind. Growing up, I used to watch this scene on repeat, and I love the idea of Bond just basically being thrown to the wind and having to get his way out of it. I mentioned it before, but I used to constantly play the level on Everything or Nothing, where you dive off a cliff and have to catch up to someone because of how similar it was to this scene. There's just something about the way the stuntman puts his hands to his arse and turns himself into a pilot-seeking missile that still gives me goosebumps, very strangely. But yeah, to be fair, the music cue's excellent. How we begin though is with Bond kissing the stewardess before being held at gunpoint.
Good thing I never been flying with anyone else.
You're so right, Mr. Bond.
Gotta be fucking kidding.
He then puts the pilot out the plane before being pushed by Jaws and having to take things into his own hands. Sure, you can see the goggles in the close-up and the fact that the guy is clearly wearing a parachute under the jacket, but in 480p on VHS with a 9-inch TV, you couldn't make this out. Even if it's clear on the big TVs now, I still think the stunt's really impressive. Put together by second unit director John Glenn, he'd go on to direct every Bond film throughout the 80s. Shot above Lake Berryessa, skydiving champion BJ Worth developed a parachute pack that could hide beneath his suit. Upon being pulled, the Velcro seams would open up and allow the hidden parachute to open. This was very top secret, and they actually hid the blueprints for this and only made it public once the film was out. It was even a lot of back and forth over if it was even possible. Broccoli told them to try, and if they failed, to let them know as quickly as possible as they could do something else. Things weren't easy though, and on the first jump, Rand DeLuca wore a camera that ended up causing his neck to whiplash once he opened up the parachute. Because of this, it took him over 4 days to recover, and they had to delay filming. In order to avoid this happening again, they basically developed a much lighter camera that wouldn't cause the weight problems. Worth also ended up playing the pilot, with Jake Lombard taking on the role of Bond. Ron Luganbill also played Jaws, and you'd never be able to tell that isn't Jaws. What? That's not Richard Kiel. What?
They're the same picture.
In total though, it took 88 skydives to get the stunts. You had to factor in all the shots with the guys wrestling in the air, the close-ups, and then the arrival of Jaws on top of it. But as you can see, it was definitely worth it, and it's just a cracking way to start the film. Also, love the close call with Jaws and how Bond outsmarts him by pulling his chute. Parachute's just the big MacGuffin in the scene, and it basically goes from the pilot to Bond to then saving his life in this intro, which is, yeah, really good writing. I will admit, this does get a bit slapstick when Jaws can't pull his cord and we get him flapping his arms in the air, but hey, it's made for kids, and 8-year-old me absolutely loved it. As an adult, you know, it's probably gonna annoy you, but I think the stunt's good enough to give this a big pass. So yeah, fantastic scene, loved it as a kid, still love it now, and it's here that Jaws crashes into the tent and we then hit the theme song. Now at this point we get the theme song by Shirley Bassey. This marks her third time being behind the Bond song, as long as you don't count Mr. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, which I still do, though this song is often labelled as her worst. And to be honest, it's actually up there as my favourite by her. Goldfinger is obviously, you know, the most known, but I don't know if it's been overplayed for me, but I much prefer this to that, and Diamonds I just think is overplayed as well, and yeah, just a jewellery commercial song. For the film, John Barry returns as the composer, and I think for this song he just brings a sultry ballad that I can even just listen to the instrumental of and relax and vibe out to. And then you've also got that amazing disco version at the end. La La Land Records have actually just released a new vinyl with all the tracks on it, and this includes the original version by Paul Williams.
Moonraker, lift up our dreams. Passion and starlight are inseparable teams.
At first I found this version a bit jarring, but it definitely grew on me, and I highly recommend that you pick up this album to hear just how good Barry's work is. That Williams song was also a demo track done for Frank Sinatra, and I think had he recorded it, would be looking at an all-timer, because the crooning would have been fantastic on that Moonraker Gold. At this point, Barry had abandoned the brass sounds that we associate with Bond, and he was utilizing springs to weave these seductive laid-back songs. A lot of people were also in the running for the recording, with Kate Bush being asked as well. And yes, I did avoid doing a running up that hill joke there. And the person who got the closest was Johnny Mathis, who actually started recording the song, but unfortunately he had to step back, and from what you can gather in the James Bond archives, they weren't that happy with how his voice was lending to the track. Barry was apparently sitting in a studio one day, and then Shirley Bassey walked in singing Goldfinger, which is in the archives, and I'm believing that's what happened. She walked in with very short notice and actually had just 2 weeks to record it. This meant that it released just in time for the premiere though, however it was very down to the wire. Unfortunately for all the hard work though, the song was a flop and it didn't even reach the top 100. Since then it's been a bit of a sore note for Bassey, who said she never got the time to promote it. She also kind of disowned the song over the airs and saw herself as being a last minute choice. So to Shirley, it wasn't really one of her songs. Eventually she just pushed it out of her routines, and it wouldn't be until 2005 that she sang it outside of James Bond on stage. But I do hope she really learned to love it, because Kevin Spoilers does. The titles are once more done by Maurice Binder, and in my opinion, he's once more improved on his work. There's not really much else to say here, except that this cost as much as the entire budget of Dr. No, but it's definitely worth it, and Binder produces his best one so far. We then join Bond at MI6 and get a quick scene with Moneypenny.
Why are you so late?
I fell out of an airplane without a parachute.
We have touched upon how she sort of became like an older sister, and there's a lot less flirting than what we'd had with Connery. Still though, I think it's a sweet scene, and yeah, the pair clearly get on well with each other. Bond then goes into M's office, where he meets Sir Frederick Grey from last time along with Q. At this point in Moore's tenure, I think everyone was just kind of all in place, and these scenes are like putting on an old coat. There's nothing really groundbreaking, and it's kind of just going through the motions, but you know, it's never a bad time spending time with these characters. They basically just explain the crash site though and the Moonraker before sending him off to meet Drax. Q also shows him his gadgets, with one being a wrist-mounted dart gun. There's steel tips and cyanide-coated ones too, and it sets up how Bond beats the baddie and also escapes a death trap. Now this gadget was actually inspired by the Wild Wild West, where a sleeve pistol is set up at one point. I actually see Nolan taking inspiration from this for The Dark Knight when he had Lucius showing Bruce the firing gauntlets. It all comes back around at the end, and we close the scene out with him destroying one of M's paintings. This is King William III, who Lee actually played in the film The Black Tulip. William was famous for his joint monarchy with Queen Mary I, possibly playing up how Bond and M are kind of partners in protecting the country. William also stood up to France against Protestantism. I'm a Protestant, I should know this. But yeah, the film's about Britain standing up to a French bad guy. So it may be a reach, and I can't pronounce Protestantism for shit. But yeah, I thought that was quite a fitting figure to have in this scene. In the book, we open with Bond at MI6 practicing his shooting against a highly skilled computer. I felt like it inspired the shooting range in Skyfall, but here Bond's in the prime of his life. Now I say computer, but you know, obviously this was written in a time when they weren't like what we have today. How it works though is that it shoots out some light at him and then photographs him so they can see who shot first. Quartermaster thinks Bond's the best shot in the service, but still the machine manages to beat him. So it kind of sets up the theme of man versus machine, and obviously the rocket itself becomes kind of an antagonist. In these opening chapters, we also probably learn a bit more about Bond than we've had altogether in the film so far combined. He had a small but comfortable flat off the King's Road, an elderly Scottish housekeeper, a treasure called May, and a 1934 4.5-litre Bentley Coupe, supercharged, which he kept expertly tuned so that he could do 100 when he wanted to. On these things he spent all his money, and it was his ambition to have as little as possible in his banking account when he was killed, as when he was depressed, he knew he would be before the statutory age of 45. 8 years to go before he was automatically taken off the 00 list and was given a staff job at headquarters. At least 8 tough assignments, probably 16, perhaps 24. Too many. Well, at least 26 with Amazon, mate. Interestingly as well, they say that you get mandatory retirement at 45 and more at this point. Well, he was 45 when he did Live and Let Die, so fuck knows at this point. Bond then goes into his office where we get things from the point of view of his secretary, which is a woman named Lililia Ponsonby. She's not in the movies, and though Moneypenny is in the books, I definitely feel like Lililia influences her a lot. The chapter then explains how she's married to the service and how it's actually a risk to meet a man in the job. If you do, then there's the chance they could be a spy, and thus every boy has to be heavily vetted. So she thinks about how she has to make a choice and either resign or stay in the service. She classes resignation as being a bit of a betrayal though, and I definitely think this informed Moneypenny's character. She then reassures herself that in 20 years time she'll get the reward of a golden line on the honours list, but it kinda speaks to how lonely these characters are, and sets up why it's so heartbreaking at the end when Bond doesn't get the girl. Bond's then called up to M's office, who asks him for a personal favour, that is to spy on Drax. For the film though, he's shipped off to California, whereas the entire book takes place in England. It's here that Bond is taken out for a sky tour of Drax's facilities, including his magnificent chateau. In the film, obviously they say they're out in California, even though most of the movie was shot in Europe, including Drax's home, with the estate being superimposed over a matte painting before we switch to the real thing. This is the Voli Victome, which has a real-life story that nicely connects to the plot. In 1661, Louis XIV's finance manager Nicolas Fouquet threw a lavish party on the grounds. This was all done to impress the king and show him how much he thought of the monarch. However, Louis didn't take it too well and thought that the party was done to show Fouquet had more money than he did. A jealous rage burned within Louis, and he then had Fouquet arrested. I say like 4K like a 4K Blu-ray, it's Fouquet or something, I don't know. The pronunciations will not be good in this video. But yeah, he accused him of misappropriating public funds to throw the bash and was thus imprisoned for life. Symbolically though, I think this plays into Drax's hubris and how this excessive pride to outdo everyone ultimately leads to his downfall. We see the lawn is full of supermodel astronauts exercising, and he's playing piano for some countesses and ladies. Now, I do like Lonsdale as an actor in general, but in this film, I just think he falls a bit flat. The guy's excellent in Day of the Jackal, and I also really like him in Munich. But yeah, I don't know, he's just very reserved and kind of spends most of his time looking blankly in silence. He's a far cry from the Drax of the book, who I think's one of the best villains that Fleming's done. He's based in his friend Sir Reginald Drax, but the names in Knighthood are where the similarities stop.
Now, as mentioned earlier, Drax in the book's wildly different. However, there is a reason for that. In the work, he's actually a Nazi who's been working with the Russians to dismantle the UK. This was playing off the enemy within trope, and it brought together Bond's enemies in both Smersh and the Nazis. Drax is slightly disfigured, with half his face being badly scarred as well. This was due to an attack from Germany in the war, which burned his face and left him with amnesia, apparently. In reality though, his name was Graf Hugo von der Drasch. He became a member of the Panzer Brigade and took part in several campaigns. One of these included disguising himself as a British officer. German aircraft mistook him and ended up attacking, and this is when the British troops found him and thought of him as a hero, which was a role he gladly accepted. Making his fortune in trading metals, he became a multimillionaire during the 50s. The most precious material he dealt in was columbite, which was used to build the rocket. He pledged to donate his entire columbite supply to the UK, and this would take Britain to the next level. In return, he was then given a knighthood. All the while, he was harboring a hate for Britain and wanted to fire the rocket on the country. Drax also planned to manipulate the stock market and bet against the rocket being a success. This was obviously played upon in Casino Royale, with Le Chiffre doing something similar with Skyfleet. Here he's played by Michael Lonsdale. They make him vastly different, and to be honest, I've always preferred the way they handle it in the book. Hopefully, we'll see him brought to the screen in Amazon's plans, because I feel like a guy with a fragile ego who builds rockets and is suspected of being a Nazi is something that won't offend anyone. What? Never mind.
Mr. Bond, Mr. Drax.
It's here that Bond meets Holly Goodhead and gets given another tour. Again, this is kind of based on the section in the book where Bond's shown about the facilities by Drax. This is where he encounters those scientists, but nothing really dangerous happens. However, for the movie, Bond's taken to the centrifuge to see if he can handle the G-Force. Designed by Ken Adam, they originally suggested just building a model, but he said, no, we're doing it for real. Goodhead then leaves the test, which is when Chang takes the controls. In the book, Drax's henchman's called Kreb, and I always kind of read him as being like that Nazi in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Guy's got round glasses, talks like this in the audiobook, and is just kind of a slimy character who's constantly trying to kill him. Bond's then pushed to his limits, and it's one of those scenes where he actually looks vulnerable. Guy's just getting completely rattled, and it genuinely seems like he's about to die. It reminds me a lot of the Shag Machine in Thunderball, but whereas that seemed goofy, this actually looks deadly. Also love the quick flash of Q that we get and just him remembering what he has at hand. Bond's saved by using the wrist darts, and he looks genuinely rattled upon leaving the cockpit.
I think I'm gonna hurl.
I think Moore's acting's fantastic here, and it really looks like he's just been on a roller coaster. Guy was probably just sat there waiting, and then they yelled action, and he stumbled on like this, but hats off because he really sells it. Spotting Chang, we then move to the nighttime where Bond makes some moves on Corrin to pump her for information. Bond eventually sneaks into Drax's office and gets some of the plans to show what he's been up to. Now this is a lot like the book where Bond stays at Drax's mansion overnight. The novel actually takes place over the space of a working week, with us going from Monday to Friday. On the Monday, Bond's asked to accompany Emma Blades to figure out how he's cheating, and there's mention of him getting a gang on a previous job in Monte Carlo where they were using invisible ink and tinted glasses to identify the cards. Anthony Horowitz later took the mention of this and expanded it in the book Forever and a Day, which is a prequel story that takes place before Casino Royale, and I highly recommend reading it. Bond initially beats Drax at cards and figures out how the guy's cheating. Got these official Casino Royale cards here from David Zaritsky, and what he does is he has a cigarette holder in one hand and deals the cards just looking over the top of them before sending them out. Very simple, but yeah, it's catching these old codgers out. As we learn, Drax is a man who made a fortune and came back and lived a life with a carefree attitude. He simply threw it about. Best houses, best cars, best women, which I think is something that probably also reflected Fleming. Bond then thinks about how obsession can push you to do more and more risky things and wonders if Drax could be ramping up. The book says that arsonists push for bigger fires, kleptomaniacs try to steal more valuable things, and Drax will do anything to beat the British. Even when Bond beats him, he writes the check so it can't be cashed until after Sunday, knowing fine well that the Moonraker will have been fired by then. Drax and the scientist also call firing it like murder, murdering their children, and he and his pals then burst out laughing, which is a bit suspicious in hindsight. Going through his office, Bond's then called by Corrin, but he busts out a safecracker which is hidden inside a cigarette case. He also gets out his 007 camera, which I always remember using in GoldenEye. Nice that they've branded it so it's also got his number on. Very secret agenty that.
Merchandising! where the real money from the movie is made.
The pair then decide to go back to bed, however Chang's been watching the whole time. You're not that good of a security guard, are you? But he then passes this on so Bond and Corin can have an elaborate death the next day. And we then go to one of my favourite Bond scenes ever. Now, we begin with a very elaborate hunt. This starts off with a very on-the-nose reference to 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is obviously, you know, playing off what was popular at the time. What I'm talking about though when I say favourite Bond scene ever is what happens next. Throughout the scene we have a sniper in a tree and Bond led out into the field to be killed. As an audience we know he's about to be shot, but Bond seems completely oblivious. But then...
Over there. You missed, Mr. Bond. Did I?
Moore apparently had a lot of distaste for using guns in films, and thus this is the only one that Bond actually fires in the movie. Because of this also marks the only Bond film where his Walther isn't shown. However, I think it was worth pushing those principles to the side for such a cracking joke, especially with how smugly Bond hands the gun back. This then builds into one of the darkest scenes we've ever had in the franchise, where Corin gets fired by Drax. Chang then sets the dogs on her and it turns into something like an Omen movie. The lighting here is fantastic, as is the music, and overall it feels like it's a completely different film. However, I love the speed of the footage, the white damsel in distress themes, and the ravenous dogs that race up behind her. Overall, it does feel a bit out of place here, but I think it's so well made. Don't have a problem with it. As for Bond, he hits up Venice and goes to an expensive glass museum. This is where they're manufacturing Drax's vials in which he'll hold the poison. Carrying on Drax's habit of recruiting all the fit birds, the woman in the desk here can later be seen at Drax's compound at the pyramids. She's actually the woman who leads Bond through the jungle and caverns and into the pyramid itself. This is also shared by the woman given the tour, who's wearing white and golden clothes akin to the Moonraker uniform. That belt mate as well, the belt gives it away. She returns at the snake pool as well, and I love how they have these characters peppered throughout the film. Bond then runs into Goodhead, who kind of brushes him off. So Bond takes a romantic gondola ride by himself, and we then get one of the worst scenes in a Bond movie. It's absolutely fucking shit. But what happens in it? Well, Bond is cruising down the canal when a funeral boat passes by. As we see, this is actually an assassination attempt carried out in the most elaborate way possible. The hitman emerges from the coffin and then throws a knife at the guy pushing the boat. Don't know why he didn't hit Bond first, but yeah, takes out the driver before killing Bond, because of reasons, I guess. Plot armor, I believe it's called. Now Bond then pushes a lever that sets the throttle to maximum and he speeds off while the assassin's coffin gets pushed off. There's a bit of slapstick as Bond rides through the middle of another gondola, which breaks in half, and then the driver sinks while the couple riding it don't even notice, which is kind of cute and a clear nod to the man with the golden gun, which I don't have a problem with, by the way. It's goofy, but I don't have a problem. However, it just goes fucking mental next. We have Bond's gondola then turn into a hovercraft, which makes me question everything else. Now for years, I was wondering whether the driver even knew if he had a special gondola, and it was only on this viewing that I spotted that Bond had talked to him earlier.
Franco, I'll call you anything.
For years though, I questioned whether this was the Q gondola or if every gondola had this, and I was 8 to be fair. However, due to him talking to the guy before, I do think this is a Q issued one, which I'll refer to as the Bondola. Now, this still doesn't fix the problems that I have, and we go into the most ridiculous chase ever with Bond driving through crowds on land to like classical upbeat music. This was apparently a nightmare to film, with the vehicle becoming highly unstable as it began to inflate. Moore fell into the water 4 times because of it, and it completely drenched his silk suit. It only brought 4 backups, and he kept falling in every time it expanded. Luckily, on the 5th and last suit, things worked out and they were able to get the shot of him riding on land. The crowd was a complete nightmare to navigate through though. Police were brought in to push people back, were too many for them to control, and thus Moore apparently drove through the middle of St. Mark's Square with a little horn to get people out of the way. They also had to suspend shooting at one point as well due to the death of Pope John Paul. Apparently the bells ringing throughout Venice was so loud throughout the day that it made it impossible to film. So just a nightmare, and even without all that stuff, The scene is terrible. Again, the whole thing is just goofy as hell, and we even have the wine guy returning from last time. If you cast your mind back to The Spy Who Loved Me, then you might remember there was a dude who double-taked on the beach when Wet Nelly drove up. Well, people must have loved that because he's back and does another double take at the Bondola. He will also return as well. I don't know why the critics and fans didn't get that idea shut down straight away, but yes, he will be back in For Your Eyes Only, so make sure you remember his face. Who won't be back though is the fucking lowest point of the franchise, and this comes when we get a fucking double-taking pigeon. A fucking double-taking pigeon.
I need to calm down. Everything's fine.
Amanda.
I'm an adult.
I think it's way too over the top though, and it's at this point that the movie kind of tanks. At an alarming speed. Even the henchmen falling off the boat's just so goofy, and this scene might be the low point in Moore's run. In my opinion anyway. If you love it, let me know in the comments below, but you are wrong. It's absolutely terrible. Anyway, Bond then sneaks into Drax's lab, and in another sci-fi reference, we see the keypad play the notes the aliens made in Close Encounters. Now, going back to that Spielberg story I referenced before, Broccoli actually contacted the director about using this, and with it just being 5 notes, the director said 'twas fine. And it even sounds like he might have fanboyed over it a bit. When it came to making the Goonies though, Spielberg then called Cubby about using the Bond theme, and Cubby apparently said, "Well, that's a bit more than 5 notes, isn't it?" Spielberg did expect he was joking though, but he just used it anyway, and in the end apparently Cubby loved the tribute. Inside, Bond then sees them working on a deadly gas that only affects humans. It's a great moment in which we learn a lot of info simply from what happens on screen. The scientists die and we pan to the rats and instantly know that Drax is targeting the human race. Bond then goes outside, which is when he encounters Chang in full samurai getup. I think it's absolutely hilarious how they then go back through the glass museum from earlier and smash up everything that the tour guide told us was expensive. I love how he also lifts a vase and sets the alarm off as well and then puts it back only for it to get smashed. But the alarm doesn't set off because the stand's still there. Classic. Good joke that. According to IMDb trivia as well, this was the largest amount of breakaway glass ever used in a single scene. Going to a clock tower, Bond then basically Empire Strikes Chang out the window. And yeah, it's a Roger Moore movie, so for some reason there's an opera singer down there.
Play it again, Sam.
But yeah, that line is of course a nod to Casablanca. Anyway, on the way up, Bond also noticed there was helpfully labelled Moonraker boxes being shipped up to Rio. That takes us to our next hotspot, but on the way, Bond drops in on Goodhead and discovers her little trinkets. We've got a literal poison pen and a diary that shoots out darts. This is a bit like Red Grant's book in From Russia with Love book, as that also had a hidden firing mechanism. There's also a radio purse and some perfume that works as a flamethrower. Also, love how Goodhead initially just tries to pass it off as regular items.
Trifle overpowering this.
But yeah, the pair then get it on, and through some packed bags and a plane ticket, Bond susses out that she's also going to Rio, and she dances on the sand. Em and Frederick Gray then arrive in Venice. Gray reveals that he plays bridge with Drax, which is a nod to the card sheet that the character is in the book. I also love how there's like a whole crowd of extras there just there to watch them film the movie. Everyone's just looking at the camera and clearly blown away by the fact they're making a film. Bond then takes Em and Gray to Drax's lab and the group then enter wearing gas masks. But it's all fine. A close encounter for Drax, if you will, and this is the first time in the series that Em shares screen time with a villain. Now, I don't know how Drax managed to do it in the space of 8 hours, but he's had the 24-hour makeover team come in and redecorate the room. He looks completely bemused and actually manages to get one up on Bond, which is quite rare for villains.
On behalf of the British government, I apologize.
Gray's completely embarrassed, but outside Bond then reveals the nerve gas. Don't know why he didn't lead with this and show them it before, but it's a bit too late now. Gray wants off the case, however, M says to go back to work unofficially.
So there was.
Yeah, mate, he's fucking Bond, mate. He didn't just make it up and drag you out here and piss about, mate. It's Bond. From here, we then cut back to Drax, who's now down one henchman. However, he's called up Hitman for hire, and this is when we get the return of the big bad. The big bad. Stepping through a metal detector, we then get that big grin, and it's a cracking re-entrance for the bad guy.
Hello, hello. Whoa, excuse me.
Marcel tells me you're our resident humanitarian. Well, you couldn't have chosen a better recipient for your kindness. This guy's a lawyer for the Duggins. Maybe he'll... You know, I kind of missed the times when it was hedge fund managers and D-grade celebrities we had to scrape off the floor of the VIP lounge. Now, with these gas prices, the freaking oil tycoons are back in style. And I mean, there's assholes and there's assholes, you know? And oil and gas people are definitely assholes.
Did you fucking say that?
It's sale day. Okay, we're throwing this stuff out with the trash. Pick up the products and get After all that effort, we end up with Jack. Excuse me, while I smash this terminal. LJT out.